Welcome to the Leadership Drip, coffee and conversations for leaders leading the next generation. We're excited to welcome another incredible guest to our table, but before we do, could you do us a favor and hit the subscribe button? And while you're at it, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. That helps these conversations reach other great leaders. Pour yourself a cup of coffee and get ready to join us at the table for another great episode of the Leadership Drip.
Rob, welcome back. We are launching season 5 of the podcast. Did you ever think we'd reach 5 seasons?
I did not actually think we'd reach 5 seasons.
You are full of faith today, friend.
Yeah, it's a faith day today.
It's a faith day. Hey, what we have today is John Ramstead. He's a former naval fighter pilot. You're a Marine, correct?
That's correct. Former United States Marine. That's correct, yeah.
Awesome. So a fellow service member for the United States,
right.
Retired naval fighter pilot, Fortune 500 manager. He calls himself a serial entrepreneur. He's a survivor of a horseback riding. He's going to tell us more about that required 25 surgeries. And he most recently authored a book called On Purpose with Purpose. Mm-hmm. You love the word purpose from your Saddleback days.
I do.
So I think this is a great guest for you.
I'm a purpose-driven man. Let me tell you that much.
John, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here, guys.
So I have to ask the question because, and I told you off the air, I can't even parallel park a car, and you've flown fighter jets and landed them on a moving object. What is it like to go from 0 to 150 miles per hour in like 2 seconds?
It is awesome.
Is it actually? It's less than 2 seconds, right? It's like,
well, when you're on the catapult and they launch you, right? You're just sitting there. You're literally in the F-14. We were at full afterburner. You're burning 2,000 pounds of gas a minute. That airplane is rattling and shaking because it's in a fitting. It can't move until the catapult fires when you're in that position. And then all of a sudden you're just sitting there, and then it is boom. And at the just imagine your entire body just being compressed.
Yeah.
And then you look down and you're at 150 miles an hour and you're flying. I mean, it's like it feels like it happens that fast. I loved it. The thing that was a bit unnerving was doing it at night. You get catapulted off the front of the aircraft carrier into absolute pitch black. And at the end of the catapult stroke, there's this huge thump. It actually kind of a little bit jarring. And all my instruments went out, and I couldn't see anything. Like I had no reference. It's pitch black. And I'm like, oh God, don't let me fly into the water. Don't let me fly into the water. And from that night on, I always I got a special flashlight with a red light to shine on my dashboard as I launched, just to make sure that never happened again. Because
so I feel like there's a great leadership principle here that you can teach us in this, like, in the darkness moment
already.
So as leaders, I think sometimes like we feel like we hit that, we're running full speed, it goes black, we don't know what to do. What did you do in that moment?
Well, you know what? You don't have time to panic.
Yeah.
You literally don't, right? Like the, oh crap thing might flash into your head, but you know what? You can't stay there. What I did, I love how you just linked this into leadership, was look for any reference, anything on my artificial horizon. I could see just enough of it to keep what I thought was my nose above the horizon and my wings level. And in what I think is in those deepest, darkest moments, those trials that we go through, maybe it's anybody that's out there as an entrepreneur, it's a business decision that you've never made before. You don't feel equipped to make, you don't feel prepared to make. And guess what? Oftentimes not making a decision for us is not an option.
Yeah.
And so what you have to do, I really think, is do the best we can to prepare for that moment so that we have the foundations in place, the fundamentals in place in our faith, our values, being connected to our beliefs. I think our identity, these are all huge pieces that just operate in the background. And I think now, even more than ever in this environment, the decisions a lot of us are making just feel like we're making them in almost that same place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because we just don't have, think about it. You're there, it's night, it's dark, right?
Yeah.
I had no information. Things were very ambiguous. And I think a lot of us feel exactly like that today because we don't know what that's part of the economy that we're operating in looks like, or my business, or what government regulations might be, how they're affecting us. So it's a similar situation, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's such a key point, especially in leadership, because when crisis moments happen or things go dark, let's just stay with the analogy. I think a lot of times what we look for are things that we depend on that aren't there, right? So we look for the things that we're accustomed to, or the things that feel normal, or the things that we can depend on, and they don't exist. And so in a leadership moment, especially in a crisis moment, sometimes you've got to go with what you're given, and what you were given was a small glimpse of enough of your horizon to keep that nose and your wings above the water, right? So I think as leaders, a lot of times what we have to do is we have to be able to actually take what's given, make the best decision possible, and lead through the crisis. And, hopefully on the other side, most of the time it comes out okay. I guess sometimes it doesn't, right? As a serial entrepreneur, I suppose some of your adventures probably have not came out the way you anticipated, right?
Yep. That's an easy answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. Well, this word purpose, all right, so you wrote a book about purpose, and purpose is one of those buzzwords, obviously, in church. With my background, working for the pastor who wrote The Purpose-Driven Life, right? I mean, one of the highest selling books of all time. But even in the business world, purpose matters, right? Having a purpose. And I think we've seen, especially in the last decade or so, maybe even 20 years or so, a shift in corporate sort of identity, organizational structure, sort of value, kind of reframing itself around purpose, not just production. So what is it about this word that's kind of driving churches, businesses, even the culture now, and sort of discovering purpose?
Well, I think, it is in every single one of us to want to, let's say, understand why we're here.
Right.
Right. What is the meaning of, like, my life, right? Like, we're going to talk about my accident, but I was dead. Right. Why was I given a second chance? What is the purpose in it? Like, it's one of these questions that's constantly there. When we know it, when we know our why, I think there's a huge gap when people feel stress, when we feel anxiety, when we just feel disconnected from either the meaning of our life or the meaning of our work, or even doing meaningful work. I think it's the difference between how connected we are with purpose. But here's something, though, as a practitioner and student of leadership for 30 plus years, everything focuses on, and I think the leadership industry has done all of us a disservice. We all focus on the why and the what and the how. And those things are incredibly important. There's people that have made huge careers on those. Do you know that here in the United States, on average per year, and I think it's every year for the last 10 years, I think this came out of a Harvard study, 24 billion with a B is spent by US companies on leadership training. And does anybody think that, like, right now we might have a little bit of a leadership crisis?
Yeah.
Just a thought. Here's the other thing. You look at Gallup and all their data on leadership, on engagement, on retention, on well-being, on active disengagement. Do you know none of those numbers, with all of that spending on leadership, it has not changed in 10 years. Matter of fact, it's gotten a little bit worse. And here's what I believe happens is there is something missing, and it's foundational, and that is who you are as a leader. Because here's what I found. I was always seeking purpose in my career. I became a believer after I got out of the Navy. I was 27 years old, and I never really connected to a purpose. So I was driven by, how do I maximize my income? How do I maximize my opportunities? How do I maximize my title and recognition? Because my identity, as you could hear in that language, was completely external.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know who I was. And let's just say that another thing for everybody listening, let's say you guys agreed to mentor me. Like, man, I'm so pumped, right? Just your background. And you could take your best stuff, your best coaching and teaching and experience and wisdom and give it to me. But if I run it through a flawed person, right? I have limiting beliefs. I have a fixed mindset. I react poorly in certain situations or with certain kind of people. I am not going to get the results that you hoped I'd get, or probably that I hoped I would get. And so here's what I found. And this is the complete premise of my book, is when we discover that best version of ourselves and we start moving toward that, then all of a sudden my purpose was absolutely right in front of me. It was crystal clear. And before, it had always been a mystery. And for me, what I realized was I was going about it backwards. I was trying to figure out the why before I worked on John. And to put it in just, I mean, for me, it was a question. I was sitting down. Well, how about this? I think there's a huge difference for most of us, for that person that we see in the mirror and who God sees when he looks down at us.
True. Yeah.
And you know what? And the bigger that gap is, I think that is the root cause of a lot of our anxiety and stress and discontent.
Yeah.
And as I started working on closing that gap and asking God what he sees and how do I see this from your perspective, and you know, how did you create me? And then I could start asking, what did you create me for? And then the why, because those things just lined up. The why, the purpose, the calling just was, then it was like rocket fuel because it all made sense.
Yeah.
From a guy who understands rocket fuel.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah.
Literally understands rocket fuel.
John, you mentioned the why piece, which when we talk purpose is often the word we link to. Simon Sinek, if leaders are familiar, start with why. That's sort of his premise. Is it, in your understanding, that if we start with who, we land on why? Or how are those two things linked, the who and the why?
Think about what's really around the who, right? Mm-hmm. When you understand your passions, like I'll sit down with a client and just say, hey, what are you passionate about? Here's a quick example. Okay. He said fly fishing. I'm like, fly fishing. Okay. Write it down. No judgment zone here, fly fishing. I'm like, but what is it about fly fishing? He goes, man, I love spending time alone on a river with God. This is my quiet time. I'm like, so is one of the things you're passionate about just quiet time in nature, really just connected with the Father? He said, absolutely. And I said, what else? He goes, oh, well, I love this. I bring people up one at a time. My son, my business partner, a customer, and we have deep, meaningful conversations on the river for hours at a time. I'm like, would that be a passion of yours? Deep, just talking with somebody, deep conversations. He said, yes. I said, what else? He said, you know what I love doing is volunteering for Living Waters. They bring veterans up into the mountains and they guide, and it's just this amazing restorative ministry. But he said that my favorite thing, he just lit up, is taking these soldiers that have never been in the mountains and fly fishing. They've been in combat and they catch a fish and they're like smiling. And I said, would it be fair to say that one of the things you're passionate about is to teach people and mentor people in a skill that then they can apply and help them succeed in? And he like lit up. And I said, and we went through some other passions of his. And I said, now, do any of those show up right now in your role of CEO of about a 200-person company? He said, no, none of them are. None of those elements of those passions. I said, how does that reshape maybe how you look at your role? He says, you know what my purpose is? My purpose is to go out right now and shape and equip and disciple. He's a believer, right? Leaders. I want to go up, and like he totally changed his frame of reference. So looking at our passions, looking at our values, looking at our spiritual gifts and our strengths and the skills, if we actually look at ourselves and we look at our mindsets and we start putting these together, it's a place I call convergence. All of a sudden, it gives you these incredible clues. This is what it did for me anyway, on what is that why and how does it link to who I am? Because as soon as I have those two, then I can figure out what to do.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great, and it brings up another question that you talk about in your book and in your podcast and some of your work about true north, and sort of that beacon point for us to go after. How do we then discover that true north, whether it be through passions or gifts or skills or whatever the process is? How do we identify that, and how do we move towards it?
Well, think about, when you're flying a mission, right? You have to know, you have to have a navigational reference. You have to be able to set an initial course. And then if you get off course, you have to have something that gives you a reference to make a course correction back. And for me, that true north, if this answers your question, let me know. But it's understanding God's nature. Who is God? This person that we're trusting, right? Who we are in relationship with. I was in God's presence at my accident, and it changed my understanding of who he is and his nature and the love, what true unconditional love is, in an instant. And it was transformative for me. And the second thing is, I think, is identity. Because I think, honestly, we have all been bound by these chains of a false identity, because we think about it as we move through life. If we want to look at the big picture, right, there are forces that are trying to prevent us to step into not only who God created us to be, but those works that he prepared beforehand for us to do.
Yeah.
And through our experiences in our life and things that have been said to us, and even what we think other people might think about us, and we fill in these gaps, that we all of a sudden we create this narrative, right? And that's the person in the mirror. And it's these chains of this false identity that just hold us back. We have to break those chains and move into our identity in Christ. And I believe personally, it's those two elements more than anything else is really, well, for me, it is my true north. And I've talked about how I connected to both of those in the book, because now I actually have a clear path or a clear reference on, hey, what is the course I should be on? How do I correct back when it is dark out and I have to make a decision? What is a decision that's in alignment with what that is and my understanding of it in this moment?
Yeah.
I think, John, I mean, obviously a man with your resume, and just in terms of being a Navy pilot, I mean, and the incredible difficulty that is just to qualify anyway. So you're a person who has not undergone, I mean, who has not been absent of difficult challenges in your life, right? So we've already mentioned the accident a couple times, but even before the show, you talked about a kind of a heartbreaking, sort of career-changing accident as well, when you were a week away from reporting to Top Gun Academy, and you got hit in the eye, and that was it. Career was over, right? And so that's a devastating setback. And then, of course, the horse accident that you mentioned already. I mean, that's a life and death moment, right? That's a life-changing moment for you. So in leadership, there's no question. Leadership is hard, right? If you don't want adversity, don't go into leadership. Don't be a leader, right? I mean, with leadership comes adversity. It comes challenges, comes difficulty. So for you, with some of these life challenges that you have had to endure or undergo, either voluntarily or involuntarily, how have you kind of grown through those? What have been some of the key things that have helped you persevere and learn through that?
Mostly, well, I'm a master of what I call delayed intelligence, because usually I look back on a situation and go, you know what, I should have said this, and it would have been a real zinger, because, I was kind of, buzzed off, or it'd be like, I could have handled that better. But you know what? I'll never forget. If you guys know who Lance Wallnow is, I was able to sit down with him as I was recovering from this accident and looking back at my whole career. And he had me do an exercise that was really powerful. And he did, those big sheets you use like at a conference thing, right on, you can stick on the wall.
Yeah.
He grabbed one of those, and he had me turn it sideways and put a big horizontal line through the middle. He said, John, I want you to go all the way back as far as you can and start mapping things relative to you as they're high and low from your spiritual journey, right? Like, as getting out of the Navy, imagine when your entire identity is rooted, and this has been my dream since a kid, as a fighter pilot, as a naval officer, and that's completely gone. And think about this is now I'm out. I couldn't find a job, and I got a job at a cell phone company, and I'm going door to doors in neighborhoods, knocking on doors, hoping somebody is home to sell enough phones to pay my rent. And the sounds of my dreams are flying over my head.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was literally like, it was one of the lowest points in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is mapped low, and all these other different things in my life, highs and lows. And then we started looking at each one of these and what was happening at the low point. What happened in that transition from the high to the low? How, can you see how you got out of that valley? What was happening? Were there people around you? Were you praying? And he helped me start looking at context of all these things. And he asked me an interesting question. He said, do any of these places here have a deep emotional connection, painful? There's still brokenness there. And I said, yeah, there's a couple that do. They really do. And he says, you know what? Healing needs to still take place. These are the places you really need to bring up in prayer, because what if you started looking at each one of these, and there's some of them, there's still some healing going on, but each one of these as an asset that has equipped you and prepared you for today. Because there's people I can serve and help today that I could not help had I not gone through some of that stuff. And now as I go through stuff, like we were about to launch this book 2 months ago, our whole family got COVID. I wasn't worried. Everybody I knew in my whole family, even a lot older than me, it was a mild flu. I found I was in the ICU for a week, almost didn't make it. And then I've been on oxygen for the last 2.5 months. I actually just got off of it. And they thought my lungs were permanently damaged at first. I had to cancel every meeting in my calendar for almost the last month. And I think I had to reschedule with you guys. That was because of COVID. And now you go through stuff like that. And now I wasn't even worried, because every time in the past, one of the things that exercise showed me was God's faithfulness in some of the most difficult, hardest, darkest days of my life and the best days. And I knew that even though I couldn't work and I had to cancel everything in my calendar, and maybe my body is permanently ravaged unless God heals me, which he actually did last weekend. It's a whole nother story. Then you know what? I'm good with it because I trust God. And I think it's that mindset for me now as I go in. And so there's been a lot of preparation, praying, reading, being with friends, being in community with people, understanding myself. Because whenever we are going to go through adversity, there's 3 seasons and they just keep repeating. We're either going into a storm, we're in a storm, or we're coming out of a storm.
Yeah.
And, repeat. So when we go into that storm, nothing stays the same. So I'm always trying to do the best I can to prepare myself to, in the storm, that some part of my life, physically, emotionally, spiritually, is going to learn something and emerge maybe a little bit stronger. I mean, that would be a win for me. Versus the other thing is you let it define you and then you go backwards.
Yeah. That's good. It's a great perspective. John, we've sort of touched on the horseback riding accident. I know it's a pinnacle, sort of critical point in the journey. For a guy that was flying planes at, I don't know, they go like 500 miles an hour or something ridiculous.
They get faster than that.
I've been, the fastest I ever was 1,109 knots, which I think is 1,300 miles an hour.
Okay, I just threw up a little bit. So, so for a guy moving at a very high rate of speed, you were riding a horse. And of all things, that was the cause of a major accident in your life. Tell us that story, how that happened, the recovery, God's hand in that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm in a retreat for a ministry called Family Talk that Dr. Dobson started. And there's just, 15 or 16 of us. And we're going to go horseback riding to have lunch. And I'm the first one saddled. And my horse all of a sudden just literally bolts and he takes off, and I'm laying flat on my back and his rump is pounding me in the shoulder blades. And I was scared I was going to get kicked off the back, fall off the back of this horse and get kicked in the head and get killed. And so I did the one thing I could think of doing, and that is to squeeze with my legs as hard as I could. Now, what I didn't know at the time, because I'm not a horse person, your horse people are probably cringing right now. I'm telling the horse to go faster.
Yeah.
And that dude's like, Roger that. And he found another gear, like, bro. I'm like, whoa. Like, at first, I'm like, okay, this is cool. But then I'm like, this isn't cool. I like, when you're on a horse, you're up high. And I don't know, what does a horse run? 30, 40 miles an hour? Like, I was not comfortable. But then I look up and we're heading straight at a steel corral fence about 80 yards in front of us. And and he's going faster and he's accelerating this whole time. I couldn't get him to turn. I couldn't get him to stop. My brain spins out of control. I mean, I've been in combat. I've been shot at. I've raised 3 teenage boys.
Like that's equivalent to combat.
Yeah, it pretty much is equivalent.
It's just, it's combat, just spread out over 17 years. I'll never forget, right in front of the fence. It's like, I had that. You guys ever had that? Like, everything slows down. It's from this massive injection of adrenaline. I found out later. But I had this moment of perfect clarity. And I remember thinking, this is not going to end well.
Yeah.
What he did is he did not change trajectory. He went straight into the fence. And right in front of the fence, he bucked so hard, he actually flipped over. And when he did that, he launched me, Superman, into the top steel beam. There's a 3-inch rolled steel beam. And the entire left side of my skull was completely caved in. I broke every bone in my skull except for my jaw and my right cheekbone. I broke my neck. I shattered my shoulder. I lost 8 teeth. And then another bar hit I crushed my rib cage, and one of the broken ribs punctured my lung. And I remember that, thank goodness. But I woke up on the ground into more pain that I could that I could put into words. I mean, this was beyond my breaking point. I probably couldn't breathe. I didn't know that, but I couldn't breathe. The pain, the panic, and I was absolutely spinning out of control. And you know that saying, God won't give you more than you can handle? Okay, it's not true. And I could not find it in scripture. You guys know where it is. You let me know. He can handle anything, and he is with me, and that's different. But in this, so I'm yelling and screaming, and this is all cut over. This is not pretty. And there's people around me who were there. We were all going on horseback together. So I'm like 80 yards away from them. They all ran over. And I can feel people hold me down, but I'm screaming and yelling and writhing, trying to get away from this pain. I didn't know that I was doing all this. And then all of a sudden, one of the guys there said, John, I just saw you relax so completely. It looked like you were sinking into the ground. And he goes, I thought I just watched my friend die. And it was in that moment, guys, that I was in God's presence. He was standing right next to me on my right side. And the love that was emanating, like it just was like coming out in waves. It literally had a physical weight to it. It was like this love was like the fabric of the universe, but it was like being at the edge of the ocean at the beach, and the waves are coming in over your body. Like I could feel the weight of it. And as it washed over me, all the pain and the panic and the fear that I was in was just completely erased. It wasn't even a memory. It wasn't like it wasn't there. I mean, it was gone. And I'll remember just sitting there basking in it. And as soon as I felt this, as soon as the nanosecond I was in his presence, the first thought that crossed my brain, and I didn't even know how badly I was crushed, was I'm not worthy of somebody loving me like this. Because in that moment, I had never actually understood what unconditional love was. I'd read about it. I had always imparted the nature of everybody I know, my own dad and people in life, right? I mean, nothing is truly unconditional as people. I knew, I had knowledge that everything and anything I ever did in my past, good, bad, or otherwise, and there's lots of all 3 categories, was not even relevant to the relationship that he has with me right now and in the present. I mean, mind blown. And so think about it, the God of the universe is next to me, and I'm feeling his love. And this is personal, like you would have like with your wife. right? Or if you're, a woman listening with your husband, like he gave us that as a gift to model what he already has with us. Think about your best moment and then times it by kind of like infinity. But this was personal. And then he spoke to me, and it was a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. And it was not to my ears. It was almost like, in Ephesians 4:6, it says, God's above us and near us and in us. Mm-hmm. It's not just Holy Spirit in us. The Trinity is everywhere, right? They're all linked. It was almost like the external Father was talking to the internal Father. Like there was like this connection, like almost like this thing flowing through me when he spoke is almost how it felt. And what he said was, all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. Mm. And where I was, honestly, in my journey at the time, I didn't even know that came from Romans. We can talk more about that too. I had drifted off that first love, that true love, over my business career. And then he said, John, I'm going to heal you and use this for my glory. And then he said this verse, but he said it with a joy. It was not stern. And that is, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now that comes from Job, right? I didn't know that either, but I'm like, wow, he said that. But as soon as he said that, I knew my left eye was blind, completely blind. It is. All the bones behind the eye socket shattered and severed the optic nerve. So, but I woke up. Well, so then he left, and I opened my eyes, and I said to everybody there, I said, God's here. You don't have to worry. It's going to be okay. Well, the woman next to me is an EMT. She's a believer. And she literally had zero expectations of me surviving until Life Flight helicopter got there, and it was going to take an hour. And in that hour, do you know that I was in no pain? Mm. I didn't complain of any pain. They'd never seen this before. I was talking the whole time. They said it was kind of like your brain was rebooting. But think about that. So then I get to the hospital, and they assessed me, and they immediately called my wife and kids and said, you need to get up here right. I was up in Montana. I live in Denver. They said, you need to get up here right away and bring the boys because it doesn't look good. That was the message she got. And I ended up in ICU for 5 weeks, and then at Craig Hospital down here in Denver with a severe traumatic brain injury for 20 months. And it was a long road. And there's a lot to even talk in there about, different faith elements, right? God says he's going to heal you. I mean, he's, Lazarus, come on out, right? And he's like, okay, good to go. Let me take a shower. I'll join you for dinner. I'm like, okay. I was texting my business partner saying, don't cancel those meetings in 2 weeks. God said he was going to heal me. I'm good to go. Well, I didn't know I was going to be in ICU for 5 weeks and take my skull off twice for 2 brain surgeries. Mm. So, it was an amazing time for me looking back on it now. How's that? Of growth. And, everything that we go through does have purpose. So there's probably a lot we could dig into around that, but maybe we can start there.
I think, one of the things that when we start talking about generational leadership, so part of the main focus of why we started the show was a conversation around young adults. And I certainly, we are the last people on earth to kind of dog a generation, right? But I think, one of the big sort of stereotypical markers against Generation Z, if we want to go down that road, is that they are not good with adversity. They don't do well with resiliency. And so I think some of the conversations that you're having right now about purpose, about understanding who you are in Christ first, your true identity, like the nature of God, how he operates in your life, and how he uses and redeems literally everything about your life. Every mistake, every failure, every pain, every hurt is redeemable in the hands of God, right? I mean, it's all usable for his glory and for his kingdom. So as young adults kind of learn and hear incredible stories like yours, and it is an absolutely incredible story, the encouragement then is not so much. So the miracle is that you're still here talking to us, right? That's the miracle. Let's just call that what it is. But the purpose behind the miracle was not just so that you could feel better or be better or continue living. The purpose behind the miracle, and I think this is the driving point, is for young adults to learn that resiliency does come through these incredibly difficult seasons of life, whether they be, accidents like yours, or whether they be relational hurts or abuse or whatever, right? That all of this is redeemable, and that young adults can take this adversity and they can use it to multiply their effect in the world. So the bottom line conversation is, and maybe you can just speak to this a little bit, is this: why are we so avoidant of the pain or of the adversity, do you think, kind of in this generation that we're in, the culture that we're in right now?
It's a great question. I've talked to my boys about this quite a bit. Are we taught that as believers it's going to be easier? Do we feel, because the level of adversity most of us have experienced is, it's hard to put into context, because maybe we feel like that's a great question. But here's what I think it is, though. If you actually really study who God is and who you are, and you trust him, because God in scripture, I've read the Bible now cover to cover multiple times, as you guys probably have too. He never promises us an explanation, right? He promises us you will have tribulation. You will have trials. And it doesn't matter whether you're a believer or not. This life is rough, but it's also a team sport. And it's the context and the perspective from which we choose. It's a choice to look at it. Do I look at it from the perspective that I'm a victim? Right. And I know there's been some people out there that have been victimized. So I don't want to use that word and discount anybody's actual experience, right? Because I've had some really painful experiences. But the question is, where could some of those, do they define who I am? Okay. Or what's the first thing God said to me? All things. All means all. That's all it means, right? It's all things work together for good. So even if I don't know it and I can't see it at the time, because think about it, I didn't want to go through 2 years in the hospital, and I lost everything. Finances gone, health gone. Like at the end of 2 years, it wasn't like, hey, John's good to go. No, I could literally walk. I was still learning to walk and speak. This was just now 7 years ago. I had no income for 2.5 years. I mean, I was wiped out financially. I had $1 million lien against me for medical bills. And that's when I decided, hey, why not become an entrepreneur? I'll start this business I'm doing now. Right. And I told my wife that, and she's like, no, go. That's what God wants you to do. But I think maybe if we frame it from this perspective, life doesn't happen to me. Life happens for me. And God is there every step of the way. Now, somebody listening, right? Did he know the accident was going to happen? Absolutely. Right. I mean, did it ever occur to us that nothing occurs to God? Like, I mean, that's not the way it works. But it did happen. And I can see now the beauty in it and the reason in it. And I would not be doing what I'm doing today. I'll tell you this, what's been restored, which is one of the biggest blessings in my life through this, is my marriage and my relationship with my boys, which was heading in a really bad direction because I was a workaholic and I was kind of miserable and grumpy just because of being disconnected from purpose and who I was before the accident, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And today my family is beyond anything I'd ever hoped for when I was younger, when I was starting out, and Don and I, we were married 31 years now, but it doesn't happen to me, it happens for me. And I think it's a difference between that mindset of looking at it.
Yeah.
And also a choice to trust God. And I think part of it is how do you trust somebody you really don't know, or you don't like, or you're not in a relationship with? One of the things, just as an example for the young kids, my son came out of high school. He was really, he really struggled during this accident. He's my oldest son. He became almost a caregiver to my two younger boys because my wife was my caregiver. So he goes to college and he just pulls the ripcord, partying, drinking, crazy, fails out of Colorado School of Mines after 2 semesters, hung around another semester. I didn't know this, just so he could party more. And then of course we got the bill for that. But it was, do you know though, it was through that horrible experience, and it was embarrassing, right? I failed out of college. I was known as the party guy. That God led him back. One of his friends invited him to a young adult group, and he started to reconnect to his faith. And then he's like, I have no idea what to do with my life. And through that, he gets, he applies to YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and goes overseas for 9 months out of Norway, and he's in Africa. Absolutely transformed his life. So you actually look at, if my son had not had that season of just darkness, there's no way God used all of it to connect him to who he was and what he's doing now. He's married. Like, he's a different kid. Like, he's on fire. If you met him, you'd be like, wow, there's something special there. Like that kid is grounded. He is joyful. He is on purpose. And so in the middle of it, though, for a long period of time, even for him as a 21-year-old, that wasn't a fun season, but it led him to a season now that, man, he is fired up.
You've not necessarily done a laundry list, John, but you have sort of scattered to our audience and to us the good that came out of it, which is an incredible story. You talk about your marriage and your boys and the ministry now you're doing. I think Rob and I can attest this. We've had adversity, nothing like what you faced, but God is very faithful to bring good out of bad times. So we applaud that. That's incredible. I do want to touch on one thing you've mentioned a couple times, and I've heard you talk about at other times, mentoring. You've mentioned some incredible mentors and men who have invested in your life. What has been sort of the key to finding the mentors to help you through different seasons, and how are you mentoring others?
Well, I think, we all need mentors. And first of all, so let's say, anybody listening, I don't care whether you're, 60 years old and you want to move into a new season, or you're a college student. I've encouraged every one of my boys to find mentors, not just their dad. And here's what you do is especially as Christians, right? We need to be fruit inspectors. So go look around and start asking yourself, who do I know that's maybe a few steps ahead of my career? Like the advice I gave my son, he's 21, he's about to graduate college. I said, what if you went and found some folks that are alumni from your university that are in your field of study, who you can just tell by either their title or their resume that it looks like they've really done well, they've gotten traction, they've really moved ahead, they've gotten some promotions. I mean, somebody who you can really relate to. And then have a conversation with them and ask them, do they share your values? Right? If they're married, how do they talk about their wife? If they're maybe a little bit older and they have kids, do they have a good relationship with their kids? Or are they more into partying and the whole social thing? Like, because it's interesting. I got out of the Navy and I was really struggling with what was next. And I met this guy. It was a networking event in San Diego. Found out he's a billionaire. I don't even know why he was at this event. It was actually, but he wanted me to come work for him, and he told me he'd mentor me. And I was so excited about it. Like, literally couldn't sleep that night. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get mentored by this guy. He's a billionaire. And I talked to my friend about it, a guy who I knew through church. He was an older guy at church who'd been, kind of more of a spiritual, like this a little discipling relationship. And he asked me these questions. Well, what's his marriage like? I said, well, I'm not sure, but it's his third one, so maybe it's going to work out okay. Right? What's his relationship with his kids? Right? Well, he doesn't talk to his kids. I do know that. But my God, he's got a house here. He's got a house here. He's got a Ferrari. He's like, okay, well, John, you can go get mentored by him, but you're going to have the same outcome. So if you want to be really wealthy and lonely, by all means, you should make that choice and go get mentored by him. I was like, oh, wow, that was real talk. So I actually chose not to get mentored by him because I didn't want that fruit. I knew that was out of alignment. So, but go find somebody, and then guess what? Just ask them. But here's what it takes. Instead of just blasting an email out and saying, hey, Rob, will you be my mentor? No, you have to take time to develop a relationship, get to know somebody, figure out a way you can add value to them, because trust me, people that are out there and they're serving and they're building something, there's a lot of people that want their time, and most people want their time because they're just kind of clinger honors. If I'm just being honest, right? They're not really people that are willing to look at what the other person did, what's the price they paid to get the results they have, and are willing to put in the work. But on the other side of that, though, everybody like you guys, I bet you could probably rattle off a list of amazing names of people that have mentored you, because everybody all the way up the chain. Think about it. Horst Schultz wrote the forward to my book. He was the founder and CEO of Ritz-Carlton Hotels. We had a number of conversations over time, and people have helped him his whole career, even back when he was an 18-year-old working as a busboy in a German hotel, when he first had a dream of maybe he could own a hotel someday. He's had mentors the whole way. So he mentor. I met somebody at Chick-fil-A yesterday, and it was so cool. And she told me that Horst has been her mentor for the last 3 years. It's been transformative. Mm-hmm. So just ask. It's amazing when you ask. And it's not like, hey, let's get together every week, but maybe we get together once a month. And then trust me, when you're a mentee, think about it. If let's say you're sitting down with Rob and he gives you you have this great session, shoot him an email and summarize what you guys talked about and say, here are my takeaways and my action steps. Hey, Rob, here's the stuff that you can hold me accountable to. Hey, this thing here, I'm really unclear of. Would you mind if maybe I shot you an email in a week or two and got your thoughts? Because I'm not going to suck a whole bunch of time from somebody, but I want them to know that I'm taking action on what they're sharing with me and that they're really valued.
Yeah.
And let's say Jeff says, hey, you got to go meet with this guy. You got to go meet with Bob. Well, I'm going to go meet with Bob and have a conversation, and then immediately shoot you an email, say, oh my gosh, thank you so much. That was awesome. Or, hey, thank you so much, but it really went nowhere. We just really didn't click, and just wanted to let you know that too. But keep that. We have a responsibility as a mentee, because if you do that, trust me, your mentor is going to go to the mat for you.
Yeah.
But that's going to take time. We got to put time in. And as a mentor, the folks that are out there mentoring, I actually now set up kind of those frameworks because I have so many people that do want to mentor with me now, and I don't have time for everybody who wants to. So I work with those people that I know are taking my time, and they're actually going out, and we're together, doing something with it.
Yeah. No,
that's cool.
Wow, that's the nuts and bolts of that, John. And then the advice to the mentee. Like, I think we've talked a lot about mentoring on the show, but the what you said, find a way to add value to them as the mentee. I don't know that anybody's ever verbalized on our show, which is an incredible principle. We have a lot of young leaders who listen, and they're always like, "Hey, I want to find somebody to mentor me. I want to," they want to gain. But the value you just gave of giving back is significant, because that relationship has to have some reciprocity, some reciprocalness to it.
Yeah.
That's incredible wisdom to the younger listeners. Actually, every listener we have, and me. I wrote that one down. I wrote that one down right there.
Hey, can I tell you just a quick example?
Yeah.
So my son he got really clear on what he wanted to do. He wanted to get into restoration ecology as a major. Mm-hmm. That's what he's going back to school for. And I said, hey, why don't we go on LinkedIn and find as many people as we can. They're like at the top of their field, and just reach out to them and see if they'll have a conversation with you on Zoom. So he and I found through my account, I think like 4 or 5 people, absolute top in their field. And he sent them a note, like, here's why I want to go in the field and I'm interested. And would you be open to just having a short Zoom call? One of the guys, who's like one of the top guys in this country, got back to my son, and they had a Zoom call, and they spent 2 hours together. And then the guy, because people had mentored him when he was getting in the field. And then he introduced my son to people he knows here in the Colorado area. And then he told them, no, don't be in this major, be in this one. This is the future of this field, and here's why, which is why he's in this major right now. And honestly, sometimes you just reach out to people and ask, and people say yes, because I think people help. I do. I think people really are wired to we're kind of wired to help each other out, and people like to help.
Yeah. We found that true on this show with guests.
We've laughed a bunch of times about how many people have said yes to us. Like,
yeah.
Well, you guys are awesome. This is this is fun. We need to have you guys come on our podcast.
We'd
love that. We'd love that. Rob, take us home.
Yeah. So we got one final question, and we ask everyone on the show the same question. And so here it is. What is one lesson that you learned in college that did not take place in the classroom?
Oh, that's easy. I got really good at avoiding campus police.
We'll have to have a.
No, I'm kidding. So here. Well, it's true, but that's a whole nother story. No, you know what I found in college is what is still with me to this day is the relationships.
Yeah.
Those, I got to tell you, the friendships and relationships I formed with college, you know what? The core guys that came around me during my accident were the guys that were my buddies back from 84 to 88. I mean, we're talking, 25 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and they're still my friends today, and they've been my support system. They've been from job opportunities to being in each other's way. I mean, we've done life together. And I got to tell you that I think that's one of the big lessons I learned in college, not in the classroom. It's just the importance of having, just real friends.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And we've certainly heard that echoed many times. Well, John, it has been a joy to have you on the show. Loved hearing your story, and looking forward to getting hold of the copy of the book myself. But anyway, so thank you so much. And as we always say here at the Leadership Drip, man, you've got a seat at the table.
Thanks for coming on, John.
Yeah, thank you guys. Have a great one.
All right, blessings to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leadership Drip. If something from this episode helped you lead better, then share it on your social media and tag us. If we see it, we may share it to our channels. We appreciate you taking time to join us, and remember, you always have a seat at the table.